Hello everyone. Hope you're doing fine, and I've been sick for a while, but I'm gonna surprise you with this video because this is my first Flutter video. So in this video, we're gonna talk about how you can create a context list and how you should be able to search within those contexts really easy. For that, we're gonna use something called the context service package. Let me show you how it looks like. So here's the package. This is called context service, and you can easily find it on pub.dev. And it's actually really easy to integrate. You can see that you have to just add the dependencies, and then you have to provide these permissions for Android or for iOS, and we're going to be using an iOS simulator, so I'm going to be using this. And then once you're done, you can import the package, and then you can use all these helper functions, context service.getContext or with thumbnails set to false, and we're going to be using actually this one, and you're going to see why we want to do that. So let's get started on how we implement the context service. So first of all, we will go to our pubspec.yaml, and here in the dependencies, we will just add this and hit save. So if you're using VS Code and you have the Flutter extension, you should see that it automatically starts getting those packages. Now, the next step is to use the values for info.plist for the permissions. So let's copy that. So I'm going to go down here, and then I'm going to copy this one. And now you will find the info.plist in your project, iOS folder, and then inside this runner folder, you can find this file here. Now there are already a lot of key string pairs here, and you can basically add it anywhere. So I'm going to add it here. And now let's save this. Now remember that if you are just starting a new Flutter app, and if you do this and you are running on a simulator, this will not actually work, because then you have to restart by running Flutter run, because it actually needs to install the pods for the context service, and it will also ask you for the context permission. Now since I already did that, it will not ask me for that. Now let's just save this, and now let's talk about what we actually want to show here. So first of all, we actually need to use a list view for all of our contexts. And a list view actually works really well with a list. So what we are going to do is we are basically going to create a list of contexts. So we are going to say list, and here we are going to say contact, and we are going to call it contacts, and then we are going to initialize this with an empty array. Now we have to import the package as well. Now that we have this, we actually have to import the contacts. So for that, I'm actually going to override the initial state function or the init state function, and inside I'm gonna call a function called getAllContacts, and then we have to actually create this function. So we can say getAllContacts, and here we are actually going to use the method provided by the context service. So I'm gonna keep this as an async function, and now let's copy the code from the documentation. So here, if I scroll down, I'm going to be using this particular function. And now in the code, I can actually use this. So you can see that it actually returns an iterable and not a list. And we have to actually find a way to fill this list instead of this iterable. So what we can actually do that is we can change this to list, but this is going to be a problem. So what we can do is we can wrap this in a small bracket, and then we can use the toList method, so it actually converts this into a list. So now that we have this, we are going to create this as a private variable, and then we are going to use the setState method, because we want Flutter to basically rebuild the list when we have the contacts back from the service. So we can simply say contacts equals contacts. Now this will populate our list, and now we can basically work with the list builder. So we can use ListView.builder, and here we have to provide the items count. It's actually item count, and then we can simply say contacts.length, and here we can also use item builder, and in this we need context and then index, and then we basically return something out of it. So what we need to do here is that we can return a list tile, and inside we are going to use two things. One, we are going to show the user's name, and also we are going to show the phone number of this particular user or contact. So let's first get a contact out of this contact service, which will be the current contact this item builder is looping on. So we can simply call it contact, and then we can say contacts index. Now that we have got this, first we are going to use the title property, and then this will be a text widget, and then we are going to use contact.display name. Oops, this is supposed to be index. Now the next thing is subtitle, and then this is going to be the contact's phone number. Now this is pretty interesting because a contact can have multiple phones. So if I do contact.phone, you can see that it's actually an iterable and it's called phones. Now in order to get a particular phone, which for simplicity we are just going to use the first phone number, so we can say element add, and then we can say index 0. Now this whole thing is basically an item, and we actually want the value out of it. Now it also contains label, but the label is something like home, work, or whatever label you have given, but the value is actually the actual number. So now that we have got this, we can basically try running it and we can see if this actually works. And this is amazing. You can see that even the text is gone now. And this is what happens when actually you are coding. Something always goes wrong. Now the error that I'm getting is this one. And if you scroll up, you'll find some information like PerformResize failed. And this is because we are using a list view inside a column widget, and they both are scrollable. So one scrollable widget is nested inside another. And what we can do is that we can use this Shrinkwrap property and set it to true. So Flutter actually can find the right size and fix this PerformResize issue. So in order to fix that, I'm just gonna go and here I can use the Shrinkwrap property and I can say this true. Now I'm gonna save this. Awesome. So now you can see that we are getting the numbers as well as the names, and we have this text above as well. So I'm going to get rid of this text actually. And now we have actually fetched the context, and you can see that how easy it is to get the context using this service. Now one more thing that we usually have in the contact is the image, and you can see that we don't have that right now. So we can actually use the leading property, and we can use that to show a circular avatar with the image or the initials of the contact. So how do we do that? So we can basically check if the contact.avatar is not equals to null and contact.avatar.length is greater than 0, which means that we have some URL inside the avatar, then we are going to use the circular or circle avatar, and then here we are going to use the background image, and we can use the memory image widget here, and inside we can provide contact.avatar. And if we don't have an avatar, we can use the circle avatar, but inside we can use child and text, and here we can say contact.initials. Now this is going to be great because right now we will start seeing initials for every contact. So I'm going to refresh and let's see how this looks once this is refreshed. Great, so you can see that we have got all these avatars right now, but for this particular contact Mohammed Esanayaz, I actually have an image. So how do we actually get those image out? So in order to do that, one thing that we can do is that we can basically remove this, and we should actually start getting the images. So let's try this out. Great, so now you can see that I'm actually getting my image. Now the next step for this video is actually to be able to search within these contacts. So how do we do that? The first thing that we need is basically a text field and a controller for that. So first of all, what I'm going to do is that I'm going to actually cut this and then move this inside an expanded widget, because we want this list to take the whole space apart from what we have for the search input. So I'm going to paste this, and then the next thing is I'm going to create a container, and inside I'm basically going to provide a child, and here I'm going to use a text field. Now this text field actually needs a controller. So what we can do here is that in the state, we can say text editing controller. We're going to name it search controller. And then we are basically going to use that here. Now that we have this, we actually need to style this a bit so this actually looks good. So for that, we are going to use something called decoration. And here we are basically going to provide input decoration. And inside we can provide some of the cool things. For instance, we can say label text, and label text can be search. Now let's see what this actually looks like so far. So you can see that we have got this input here and we have got this label here. And if we click, this goes up, and now I can also type a lot of things here. But we actually need to kind of modify it a bit so this looks even better. So for that, I'm going to introduce something called border. And inside, I'm going to say outline, input, border. And inside, what I can do is that I can say border side. And here, I'm going to say new border side. And I'm going to provide a color to this border side. So I can say theme dot of context. And here, I'm going to say primary color. And we actually need to provide the new constructor here because then it will assign this to the border. And we also need to put a comma here. Now that we have set things up, the next thing is to also provide an icon. But let's see how this looks so far. So now you can see that this has a really nice border to it, and this actually looks prettier. Now the next thing is to actually use an icon along with this. For that, we can use something called the prefix icon. And here we have to provide an icon. So we will name it, or we will use the icon called icons.search. And with this one, we are basically going to use the color of theme of context, and we are going to use the primary color. Cool. So now you can see that we also have this really nice icon, and this search input looks really good. Now, how do we actually filter the context? That's the question. So in order to basically look if the search controller has changed or the text inside this search input has changed, we have to bind a listener to this search controller. And we can do that inside the initState method. So what we can do here is that we can say search controller dot, and then we can use add listener. And here we can provide a function that it needs to call whenever something changes inside the search controller text. And we are going to call it filter context. Now, what we can do is that we can create this function here. So we can say filter context, and here we have to somehow filter the whole context. Let's see if there's a mistake. Oops. Yes. So now we have this set right. Now what we can do is that instead of mutating the original array or original list, we can create another list here, and we can call it context filtered. Now whatever we filter out of it, we will basically assign to this, and this should basically show in the contact list. So how do we do that? First of all, we will check if the search input is not empty. So the way we do that is that we can say if search controller dot text, and then we can use is, and there are two things that we can check, if it's empty or if it's not empty. So if it's not empty, then we are going to filter the context out. So before filtering out, what we can do is that we can create a private variable here or a list here, and we can call it context. And we are basically going to work with this context list. And then we are going to assign with an empty array. And then we will say context dot add all, and we are going to fill this list with the actual contacts, all of them. Now that we have set this, the next thing to do is basically to work with this context list and see which contact matches with the search query that we have done. So in order to do that, what we can do is that we can say contacts dot retain where. Now this is a really interesting function, and what this actually does is that it removes all of the objects from the list that fail to satisfy this function that we are going to provide. So we are going to provide a function which will have a contact, and then we are going to provide some logic that will return true or false. So what can we do here now? We have to match the search term against the contact's username or the contact's display name. So first of all, let's take a string here and we can call it search term, and this is going to be search controller.text.to lowercase, because we want to compare the strings but without having a case. And then what we can do is that we can compare this with the user's display name but lowered down. So we can say string username, or let's call it contact name, and then we can say contact dot display name dot to lower case. Now that we have got this, we can basically say return contact name dot contains search term. Now this will either return true or false, and this doesn't have a T. So now this will return either true or false if the term matches or if it doesn't. And this contacts list will be reduced with only the items which match this condition. And once we are done, we can basically set the contacts filtered array with this private variable. So what we can do is that we can say set state, and then we can say contacts filtered equals contacts. Now this will force the whole UI to rebuild because now we have the filtered list updated. Now let's save this, and now we will put the logic that we need to put here to show either the filtered contacts or the actual contacts with all of the items. So we can take a variable, or we can say bool is searching, and we can basically find that out by search controller.text is not empty. So we are going to basically see is searching equals true. So if that's the case, then we are basically going to use contacts filtered dot length, because then we will be showing the filtered contacts. Otherwise we are going to show the contacts dot length. Now that we have set this right, we also need to do the same for this contact, because then we have to basically get the particular contact out of the filtered contacts. So I'm going to copy this because I'm lazy, and then I'm going to paste this, and then I'm just going to replace this one and also this one, and now we are actually good to go. So now I'm going to save this, and now we are going to try this out. Awesome. So now we have refreshed this, and if I try typing A-N-N-A, you can see that I only get Anna. I can also type Muhammad, and you can see that we only get this list. And if I remove everything, you can see we get all of the items within the contact list. Alright, so the next challenge is how do we find contacts by phone number? And in order to do that, first we will make sure that if a contact is found by name, we just return true in this condition, so we don't have to compare the phone number. So for that, we will basically create a bool, and we will call it name matches, and we will basically just move this computation and assign it here, and then we will check if name matches equals true, then we just return true right away. Now that we have set this, the next step is to verify by phone. So for that, what we can do is that we can simply create a variable called phone. So we will say that the contact is found even if one phone number matches the search term. So for that, we can simply say contact dot phones dot first where. So first where is a method that we can use, and it actually accepts a function in which you define the condition, and if it returns true, this particular element will basically be counted in the query. So we can simply say phone, and here in fact let's call it phn, and now what we can do is we can say return phn dot value, because this is the phone number, and then we can say contains and then the search term. Now one important thing to note is when working with first where is that we have to provide this or else method. Otherwise, if it doesn't find anything, it will just break. So for that reason, we'll just say or else, and here we can simply say null. So if it doesn't find anything, it will basically return null, and then we can simply say here return phone equals null, and this actually should be not equals null. So if we have found the phone, this will be counted as a contact which is searched. So I'm just gonna refresh and we'll see how this works. Cool. So if I go here and if I type 879, you can see it actually finds my number with the phone, and this is amazing. Now the only problem is if I type 5, you can see that it doesn't find it anymore, and the reason behind that is that the phone's value property or the phone number also has spaces, dashes, and this plus as well. So this is making it harder to find, and for that we have to actually find a solution. So let's see what we can do. We will basically create a function and we will call it Flatten Phone Number, and here we will basically pass a string. So we will call it phone string, and then here we will basically be returning back a string as well, and here we will basically use return phone string, and we are going to use the replace all mapped method. Let me tell you what would happen if we just use replace all. So here we are going to use a regular expression. So for that we can use regexp, and here this is the regular expression that I'm going to be using. So this basically would replace anything that is not a number, and then it will replace it by an empty string, and this will just return it back. So what we need to do is that before we compare it, we have to kind of strip down the number from the search term as well as from the phone itself. So since we are going to do this multiple times, it's better that we kind of create the search terms flattened version here. So we can say search term flatten, and here we will basically use flatten phone number, and we'll say search term. Now since we have done this, one good idea is to make sure that if the name doesn't matches, we also are comparing and checking if search term flatten is empty. So if it's empty, we will just return false. So now that we have this check in place, let's see how we can compare this. So for the phone number, we also have to flatten that. So we have the search term flattened. Also, we have to have the phone number flattened. So we can say string, and we can say phone flattened, and here we can say flatten. I'm just gonna copy this, paste this, and then we will say phone.value. So now that we have that, we can simply check this against this, and here we are going to use search term flatten. Oops. Let's quickly do this, and then we have the search term flatten. We are going to use that, and now let's just save this and try this out. Cool. So let's try my number again, and this is gonna be 879. We are still getting the contact, and if I type 5, you can see that still we are getting this value. So we can type 4676879, and you can see that it works. Now one important thing is that sometimes people actually use the plus sign while searching the phone number, and it could be because of many reasons or to avoid certain phone numbers as well. So how can we do it in a way that if the user types plus, it's fine for us, but if there is any other thing that is excluded? So for that, we actually can use the replace all mapped method. And what it does is that we will use replace all mapped, and this one will take regex, but secondly, it basically takes a function. So what we can call is that we can say this is gonna have a match m, and here we are going to do some magic. So what we can do here is that we can check if the match at 0 position is the plus sign, then we basically return plus. Otherwise, we return an empty string. So in our regex, we are already capturing this group, which is having the plus. So we are actually capturing via this regex this whole scenario, and this will either give us the plus sign or not. So what we are trying to find is that if at 0th position of this matches, we have a plus sign, then it's fine, we do this plus. But even if the plus is written afterwards in the string, it wouldn't work, it would just return the empty string. And this is actually the power of regex, and I really love it. So now let's save this and try this out. Awesome sauce. So I'm gonna type plus 46 and you can see it works, but if I type plus, it doesn't work because of what we did here, and there's all the magic. So now I can type plus and get values out of it. For instance, I can also type 1 and 8, 7. You can see that we got John Wick, and yep, this is how we can actually find numbers pretty easily in our context list. And that's pretty much it for this video. And if you like what I did in this video, please share this with your friends, and also subscribe to the channel because there's a lot of content coming out because I'm learning every day. So stay tuned and be happy. Thank you.